On Mother's Day, my millionaire son came to visit with his glamorous wife, Emily. He smiled, handed me flowers, and asked softly, "Mom, are you happy with the $6,000 Emily sends every month?" I looked down at my trembling hands and whispered, "Son, it's not the money that keeps me alive, it's the church." He froze, and before he could speak, Emily walked in, diamonds shining, a designer purse in her hand, and her face said it all. That was the moment everything began to unravel: the lies, the guilt, the truth about who really kept me alive. Before we dive deeper, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. If you enjoy emotional family stories and true life betrayals like this, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and tap that notification bell so you never miss a story that could touch your heart or break it. After that day, when my son's question hung between us like smoke that wouldn't fade, my mind drifted back to how everything began. Years earlier, when my husband passed, the silence in the house became louder than any sound. His tools still sat by the back door, his Bible still open on the nightstand. For the first few weeks, neighbors came by with casseroles and condolences, but soon even those stopped coming. Bills began piling up faster than I could manage, and the loneliness settled into my bones. I remember sitting at the kitchen table one night, staring at the final notice from the electric company, wondering how long I could keep pretending everything was fine. That was when the church stepped in. Quietly, humbly, without asking questions. Sister Martha from the choir slipped envelopes into my mailbox with grocery gift cards. The pastor organized volunteers to fix the leaking roof. Every Sunday, someone brought a warm meal for me to take home. They didn't make a show of it, they just helped. I told myself I'd pay them back someday, but as weeks turned to months, it became clear that I had nothing left to give except gratitude and prayer. It was around that time Emily began calling more often. Her voice always came through the phone bright and polished, like she was reading from a script. "Mom, don't you worry about anything," she'd say. "Daniel and I will send you something each month. You shouldn't have to depend on anyone else." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think she cared. But the first month passed, and nothing came. Then the next, and still nothing. I assumed perhaps she forgot, or that there was some banking delay, so I waited. Eventually, Daniel mentioned during one of his rare visits that Emily had set up a monthly transfer. "You should be getting $6,000, he said, smiling proudly, as though the thought alone counted for something. I nodded, not wanting to shame him. My heart ached as I remembered Sister Martha handing me another envelope that same morning, saying softly, "We all chipped in, dear. The Lord provides." And he did, just not through the people my son believed. I stayed silent. I didn't want to embarrass Daniel or make him question his marriage, but every time he looked at me with gratitude toward his wife, it tore me apart. I wasn't angry. I was disappointed. Disappointed that love could be so blind and that pride could keep a woman like Emily from admitting she had done nothing. I spent nights praying that God would reveal the truth in his own time, not mine. I didn't need revenge, only peace. The church became my lifeline, a family that gave without keeping score. While Emily posted photos of luxury vacations and charity galas, I was home, folding donated clothes and thanking God for kind strangers. My body aged faster in those years, not from labor, but from the quiet weight of keeping up appearances. Every call from my son reminded me that he lived in another world, now a world where love was measured in dollar signs and social status. He believed I was comfortable because Emily told him so. He never asked to see the bank receipts or the bills, he simply trusted her word. And I let him, because the truth would have broken him before he was ready. Some nights, I'd sit by the window, holding the worn Bible my husband once read from, whispering prayers for both of them. I told myself that one day, Daniel would understand who really kept his mother alive. One day, he would see the faces of the women who prayed over my kitchen table, the men who fixed my gutters without charging a dime, the congregation who refused to let me disappear into loneliness. That day came sooner than I expected, but at the time, I only had faith to hold on to. My heart learned to be content with small miracles. A knock at the door, a basket of groceries, a stranger's kindness. Those were my blessings, proof that even when family fails, grace does not. If you still have your mother, call her today. She may never tell you how much she needs you until it's too late. And if this story reminds you of someone, share it with them before regret sets in. Weeks turned into months, and though my heart tried to stay anchored in peace, something about Emily's generosity began to feel heavier each day. One Sunday afternoon after service, Sister Martha asked if she could have a quiet word with me. Her face looked conflicted the way good people look when they carry someone else's burden. We sat in the church garden under the jacaranda tree, purple petals falling like whispers. She hesitated for a long moment, then took my hand. "Mother Evelyn," she began softly, "I think you should know. People in town have been talking." I frowned, not understanding. "It's about Emily," she said. "She's been telling folks that she's the one taking care of you, that she sends money every month, pays your bills, and even donates to the church in your name. She calls it her charity work, part of her social brand." Her words cut through me like cold rain. I sat still, unable to speak. Sister Martha's grip tightened around my hand. "She even asked for receipts," she continued quietly. "She used the donations we made for your groceries and repairs as tax write-offs. Said it helps her company look good for the holidays." I felt something in my chest twist, not anger at first, but grief. Grief that someone could twist kindness into currency. I had lived my entire life believing that blessings should be shared, not branded. Later that day, Pastor James came by. His tone was gentle, the way you speak to someone whose heart you don't want to break. "I know about what Emily did," he said, setting down a basket of fruit on my table. "But please, don't let this shame you. You've done nothing wrong. Sometimes, protecting your peace is more powerful than exposing someone's lies." I wanted to believe that. I really did. But that night, when I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop hearing her voice. Emily's soft, calculated tone whenever she spoke about helping family. How many people believed her? How many smiled at her charity posts online, not knowing the truth? I thought about confronting her, calling Daniel and telling him everything. But every time I picked up the phone, something stopped me. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was pride, or maybe, as I told myself over and over, it was faith. I wanted to confront her, I whispered one night, praying into the silence. But maybe God is testing me to see if I can forgive, even when betrayed. Forgiveness isn't weakness, I reminded myself. But silence? Silence can sometimes become its own sin. I continued to go to church, to smile when people asked about Emily and Daniel. I even thanked her publicly once, knowing she might be watching online. It wasn't for her, it was for me. Because grace doesn't mean pretending you don't hurt. It means choosing peace even when the world mocks your pain. But deep down, something was shifting inside me. A quiet realization that grace without truth becomes a prison. And sometimes, silence isn't holy. It's dangerous. And that Mother's Day, when Daniel showed up with flowers and that question on his lips, my silence finally ended. If your mother ever stayed quiet to protect you, thank her today. Her silence might have carried more pain than you'll ever understand. And if you believe every act of kindness deserves truth, share this story, so no other mother suffers in silence again. The week leading up to Mother's Day was warm, filled with the scent of lilies and the hum of quiet excitement in the church. I volunteered, as I always did, helping Sister Martha arrange the floral decorations and polish the brass candle holders. The sunlight poured through the stained glass windows, painting the pews with streaks of crimson and gold. Children practiced their little verses for the mothers, and the choir rehearsed Amazing Grace until their voices floated through the building like prayer itself. Pastor James had announced that this year's service would be special. He wanted to honor those who had supported struggling mothers in the community, and though he never said names outright, everyone knew my story had become a symbol of quiet endurance. My son and Emily had confirmed they would attend. When I heard that, my hands stilled over the tablecloth I was folding. For a brief moment, my heart raced, but not with fear, with a strange calm. For years, I had prayed for peace, for forgiveness, for the strength not to expose anyone. But as the choir's voices swelled, I felt something else stirring inside me, a readiness. I didn't plan to speak. I didn't need to. The truth had its own way of finding light, even when buried beneath layers of pride and deceit. I realized that the Lord didn't always demand confrontation. Sometimes, He only required patience and courage to stand still when the truth finally arrived. That evening, Pastor James stopped by again to check on the arrangements. He looked tired but content. "It's going to be a beautiful service," he said. "You've been such a pillar to this community, Evelyn. God truly shines through you." I smiled softly, hands folded in front of me. "I'm just grateful to have a place where I'm still useful," I replied. "The church has given me more than I could ever repay." He nodded, then hesitated. "Emily and Daniel confirmed they'll be in the front row," he said gently. "I thought you should know." My chest tightened, but I nodded slowly. "That's good," I said. "It's time they see what faith really looks like." That night, I sat on my porch beneath the dim porch light, staring at the roses I had trimmed earlier that day. The air was quiet, except for the distant croak of frogs by the creek. I thought of all the times Emily smiled for photographs, holding charity checks that didn't belong to her. I thought of Daniel's proud words, how he believed his wife's generosity was the reason I was safe and comfortable. The truth, I realized, wasn't mine to protect anymore. It was God's to reveal. I took out my old Bible and slipped a note inside one of the pages, a verse I'd chosen carefully. "For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought out into the open." When the morning of the service came, I dressed in my best lavender suit, the one Daniel had bought me years ago when he still called every week. I pinned my church brooch to my collar and looked in the mirror for a long time. The woman staring back looked older, yes, but not defeated. There was light behind her eyes again. I didn't need revenge. I only needed truth. And truth was patient. As I walked into the church that morning, the choir began singing "Amazing Grace." The sound filled every corner, every heart. The sunlight streamed through the windows, washing over the congregation like forgiveness itself. I took my usual seat, third row from the front, near the aisle, and when Daniel and Emily walked in, dressed to impress, I simply smiled. I had no intention of speaking that day. Because sometimes, silence isn't surrender, it's preparation. The morning sun spilled through the stained glass windows, painting the church in soft colors of grace and reverence. Every pew was filled. The smell of lilies and freshly polished wood hung in the air, and the choir hummed quietly in the background, preparing for the first hymn. I sat where I always did, third row on the right, hands folded neatly in my lap. I had been to countless Mother's Day services before, but this one carried a stillness I could feel in my bones, a stillness that felt like the pause between a heartbeat and a truth too heavy to ignore. Then they walked in. Daniel first, handsome as always, his tie perfectly straight, his smile practiced. And beside him, Emily, radiant in a cream dress, diamonds glinting on her neck, her designer heels tapping softly against the church floor. The congregation turned, admiring them as if they were royalty. I watched her smile sweetly at the pastor, shaking hands, accepting compliments that were never hers to receive. I wondered if her heart raced the way mine did, knowing that everything she'd built on a lie was moments away from trembling. The choir began to sing, "Blessed Assurance." The melody filled the church like a tender wind, and I felt tears sting my eyes. This place, this humble wooden building, had carried me through grief, hunger, and loneliness. It was here that strangers had become family, and where faith had fed me when the world had turned away. When the last note faded, Pastor James stepped to the pulpit. His voice was warm but firm, echoing through the hall. "Today," he began, "we celebrate not just mothers, but the hearts that give without expecting anything in return. The hands that serve quietly, the souls that lift others even when they themselves are weary." Heads nodded. A few women wiped their eyes. Then, with a slow, deliberate breath, he continued, "And we must also thank those among us who have extended their blessings to others in love. Like Emily." A murmur swept through the crowd as his gaze settled briefly on the front pew. "Yes," he said gently. "Emily, our generous daughter-in-law, who's helped her mother-in-law for years." Applause erupted around the sanctuary. I watched as Emily straightened her shoulders and smiled that polished, graceful smile that could charm anyone who didn't know the truth. Daniel placed his hand over hers proudly. For a moment, she looked untouchable. her confidence glowing beneath the adoration of the crowd. But Pastor James didn't stop there. His tone softened, carrying a weight that only truth can bear. "And for those who gave," he said slowly, "even when they had little, for those who shared what they could, not for recognition or reward, but out of pure love, may God bless you abundantly." The applause quieted, replaced by a gentle murmur of emotion. I turned slightly and saw them, the women from the church. Sister Martha, Mrs. Green, old Mrs. Turner, tears glistening on their cheeks, soft smiles spreading as they looked in my direction. I felt my throat tighten. They weren't wealthy women. They were widows, caregivers, mothers who had given from scarcity, not abundance. They had been the true donors, the ones who kept me alive when I could no longer keep myself afloat. And in that moment, I didn't need anyone to speak for me. The truth didn't require words, it was alive, breathing through every tear-streaked smile that turned toward me. I glanced toward the front pew. Emily's smile had faltered. It was subtle, a twitch at the corner of her mouth, a flicker in her eyes, as if she sensed the ground shifting beneath her. Daniel's proud expression faded into confusion as he looked from the pastor to the congregation, trying to understand the sudden change in tone. Pastor James closed his Bible softly and stepped away from the pulpit. "Let us pray," he said, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. "That every heart in this room may find peace and truth, and that those who have given in silence receive the honor they truly deserve." As the church bowed their heads, I kept mine lifted for a brief moment. My gaze met Emily's, and for the first time, she looked unsure. Her eyes darted away quickly, but I could see it. The guilt, the panic, the quiet realization that the truth she dressed in luxury was finally stepping out of the shadows. I lowered my head and whispered a prayer, not for revenge, but for revelation. Because truth, when it comes, does not shout, it stands quietly, and the world adjusts itself around it. And as the final hymn began, and the choir's voices rose once again, I could feel it, Emily's smile beginning to fade, because she could feel the truth closing in. A silence hung heavy in the church, the kind that feels like time itself has stopped to listen. The hymn had ended, and Pastor James stood quietly before the congregation, his Bible resting against the pulpit. His eyes moved slowly across the room from the widows in the back pews to the front row, where Daniel and Emily sat, still trying to hold their composure. Then, in a tone gentle yet unyielding, he spoke. "Before we close this service, there's something that needs to be said, something true." His words carried a weight that settled over every heart in the room. "For months, I've heard praise for the generosity of our sister Emily, who, it was said, has supported her mother-in-law so faithfully." A few heads nodded. Emily straightened her shoulders, her painted smile returning, trying to regain the room. "But," Pastor James continued softly, "it wasn't Emily's generosity that sustained our sister. It was the hands of this church family, the women who shared their food, the men who repaired her roof, the neighbors who gave when they themselves had little." Gasps rippled through the sanctuary like a sudden wind. A few people turned in their seats, whispering in disbelief. Emily blinked rapidly, her face draining of color. Daniel's proud expression froze, confusion crossing his eyes. "What do you mean?" he whispered, his voice trembling slightly as he turned toward the pastor. "My wife, she's been sending money every month." Pastor James looked at him kindly, though his eyes were firm. "Son, every envelope we ever received was signed in her name, but none of it came from her. The receipts show that the funds were from members of this congregation. Your wife used their kindness as her own, and even filed it as charity work under her business." The room erupted into a wave of hushed voices. Some gasped, others looked down, shaking their heads in pity. Emily stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the polished floor. "That's not true," she said quickly, her voice breaking. "There's been a mistake. I was helping. Maybe the bank." Her words faltered as a frail hand rose from the middle row. It was Sister Martha, holding a small folder close to her chest. "I'm sorry, Pastor," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "But I have the receipts right here." She stepped forward, her shoes echoing softly against the tile. She handed the papers to Pastor James, who opened them slowly, revealing a neat stack of donation slips, every one of them marked with Emily's name in the donor section. But the payment lines showed transfers from other accounts, small ones, from various church members. The truth was right there in black and white. Emily's lips parted, but no words came. Daniel reached for one of the receipts, his hands shaking as he scanned the details. The air around him seemed to collapse, the realization crashing over him like thunder. He looked at his wife, the woman he had trusted, defended, and believed, and for a long moment he said nothing. His silence spoke louder than any accusation could. "I didn't mean," Emily started, her voice cracking. "I just thought it would look better if—" She trailed off, her words fading into the murmurs around her. The congregation sat in stunned quiet. No one shouted, no one scolded. They simply stared, a wall of eyes heavy with disappointment and disbelief. I sat in my seat, still and calm. My heart wasn't angry. It was simply tired, tired of pretending, tired of carrying the weight of lies that were never mine to bear. I watched my son's face, the way his eyes glistened with tears. He tried to blink away. The man who once thought wealth could fix anything was now watching his world crumble, not from poverty, but from pride. Pastor James closed the folder gently and set it aside. "We all make mistakes," he said quietly. "But the Lord values truth above pride, and it's in moments like this that we learn who we are and who we still have the chance to become." Emily lowered her head, her hands trembling as she sank back into her seat. Daniel reached out as if to comfort her, but stopped midway, his hand hovering in the air before slowly dropping to his lap. The church remained silent, a holy silence that didn't need words. The truth had finally stepped into the light, and there was no taking it back. And as I watched the tears roll down my son's face, I knew this wasn't punishment. It was revelation. Because sometimes, truth doesn't destroy you. It simply shows you everything you refuse to see. The truth hit him like thunder. And I watched as my son's perfect world shattered. The air inside the church was thick with quiet tension. No one spoke for several long moments after the truth was laid bare. Even the children, who had been restless moments earlier, now sat perfectly still. Emily sat rigid on the front pew, her fingers clutching the edge of her designer purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. Daniel's gaze was fixed on the floor, his jaw trembling as though holding back words that refused to stay silent. Pastor James finally closed his Bible and said gently, "Let us remember that grace lives in truth. What we do now determines the kind of hearts we carry home today." Then he stepped down from the pulpit, leaving the silence to do the rest. I watched as Daniel rose slowly to his feet. His face was pale, his lips pressed together as if every breath cost him something heavy. He turned toward me, my son, the same boy I once held when he was too afraid of thunder, the man who'd grown up believing success could silence all pain. But in that moment, I saw not the millionaire everyone admired. I saw my child, broken, humbled, searching for his way back. He walked toward me in slow, uneven steps. The entire congregation watched in silence as he stopped in front of my pew. For a brief second, he couldn't meet my eyes. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Mom, I didn't know? I swear I didn't know." Tears blurred my vision, but I managed to smile. "I know, Daniel," I said softly. "You believed what you were told." He shook his head, his voice trembling. "I should have visited more. I should have asked. You deserved better, not this, not to struggle while I was too busy chasing everything that doesn't matter." The sound of his regret filled the church like a confession. Some people wiped their eyes quietly. Then, to everyone's surprise, Daniel turned toward the congregation. His voice steadied, even as his eyes glistened. "To every one of you who helped my mother," he said, "thank you. You gave her what I couldn't: love, care, and faith. And I promise, from today, I'll never let her carry a burden alone again." His words echoed through the room, sincere and trembling, a son's heart finally laid bare. Emily suddenly stood, her chair scraping sharply against the floor. Her face was red, her breath shallow with anger and humiliation. "You're all enjoying this, aren't you?" she snapped, her voice rising. "You think you're better than me? I was trying to help, Her words faltered when Daniel turned to her, his expression calm but resolute. "No, Emily," he said softly. "You were trying to look like you were helping. There's a difference." A hush swept over the church again. Emily's lips quivered. For a heartbeat, she looked at him as though pleading for a way back. But when none came, she lifted her purse, straightened her dress, and walked briskly down the aisle. heels clicking like the final punctuation to a painful chapter. The large wooden doors opened and closed behind her, leaving only the sound of the wind whispering through the stained glass. Daniel turned back to me, his eyes full of tears. Slowly, I stood and opened my arms. He stepped into them like a child returning home after a long journey. I felt his shoulders shake as he wept against me. My hand brushed through his hair, the same way I did when he was little, and I whispered, "Money fades, Daniel, but love, that's what keeps a mother alive." He nodded against my shoulder, his voice barely audible. "I understand now, Mom. I really do." The congregation rose quietly, some bowing their heads, others smiling through tears. Pastor James stood near the pulpit, hands clasped, his eyes shining with the kind of peace that comes only after truth has done its work. I looked around the sanctuary, the women who had helped me, the men who'd offered small kindnesses, the faces of faith and forgiveness. Every one of them had been part of the story that brought my son home again. Daniel wiped his eyes and whispered, "I don't deserve your forgiveness." I smiled gently and said, "Forgiveness isn't something you earn, son. It's something you accept." He nodded slowly, then turned to thank each person who had stood by me. No one spoke harshly of Emily, they didn't need to. The lesson had already been written in the quiet of that church. Wealth might impress the world, but compassion sustains the soul. And as the choir began to hum the closing hymn, Daniel sat beside me for the first time in years, his hand wrapped around mine, not in guilt, but in love reborn. If your mom ever struggled but still smiled for you, don't scroll away. Leave a heart in the comments and share this video, because sometimes love deserves to be seen before it's gone. The weeks that followed were quiet, not the kind of silence born from loneliness, but the kind that comes after a storm has finally passed. Daniel began visiting every Sunday after service. He'd sit beside me in the same pew where we once stood divided, now listening, learning, and laughing again. Sometimes he brought food, sometimes flowers, and sometimes he brought nothing at all, just his presence. And that, more than anything, was what healed me. The congregation, once cautious around him, began to open their arms too. The same people who had seen me struggle now saw my son helping fix the old church fence, carrying heavy boxes of hymnals, joining in prayer circles with men twice his age. The whispers that once carried pity now carried warmth. "That's Mrs. Porter's boy," he came back. Pastor James often said, "True repentance doesn't shout, it serves." And Daniel lived that truth quietly, week after week. As for Emily, word spread that she'd filed for divorce soon after the incident. Her carefully built image, the perfect wife, the picture of wealth, began to crumble. Her social circle turned cold, invitations stopped coming, and her name was no longer spoken with admiration but with pity. I didn't rejoice in her downfall. I prayed she'd one day find the peace she spent so much money trying to buy. Daniel never spoke ill of her. He simply said, "Some people aren't meant to walk the same road forever." And with that, he moved on humbler, softer, and finally free. Every Sunday after church, Daniel and I would sit on the front steps, watching the children run and laugh across the grass. The same sunlight that once felt distant now warmed my skin again. I'd glance at my son beside me, his laughter lighter, his eyes no longer clouded with pride, and I'd whisper a prayer of gratitude. That day at the church had changed everything. Not just for him, for me too. Because it reminded me that healing doesn't come from wealth or comfort. It comes from truth, forgiveness, and love that never stops showing up. I looked out at the people who'd stood by me and thought to myself, some hearts are rich in faith, even when their pockets are empty. And sometimes, the ones who give you nothing in money, give you everything in love. Daniel squeezed my hand and smiled. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said softly. I laughed, shaking my head. "No, son. This time, I'm proud of you." As the church bell rang in the distance, echoing across the quiet town, I felt peace, not the fragile kind that can be broken, but the deep, enduring kind that settles in your soul when everything finally makes sense. What would you have done if your son believed a lie about you? Comment below. Your story might help someone else heal today. And if you believe that love and truth always win in the end, hit that like button and share this story with someone who needs to hear it.